evidence-based strategy to crime reduction in Alberta. Now, this involves building one of the largest remand centers in Canada, Edmonton, 2,000 cells, huge, bigger than Mimico. But they're not just building that. They're investing in targeted programs for prolific offenders, specialized courts that we have in some places in Ontario, yes, drug courts, mental health courts, domestic violence courts. We have them in some places. But they're going to do it everywhere. They're also investing big time in proven prevention. That's everything from parent training through to youth programs, through to police, social worker teams dealing with gangs. And they're not just doing it 1 year at a time. They've got a long-term vision, a 10-year vision. Now, Waterloo is sitting there scratching his head at a 10-year vision. That's because they have a 40-year vision. So I think you can go for 50 years, but 40 isn't bad. But getting a 10-year vision is what you need. A 10-year vision means, well, within 10 years, we're going to have reduced the homicide rate. There's no reason why your 13 or 15 homicides can't be cut in half. And whatever it is, robberies, assaults, they can be cut in half within a 5-year period. And if I was the chair, I would talk about a 10-year period, but I'm not the chair, so I'm going to talk about a 5-year period. But you have to have a vision of where you're going, and they have that vision. Winnipeg, disaster city. Auto thefts, a rate higher than any other city in North America. They tried to fix it through police, problem-oriented policing. Went down a bit, went back up. So they called in Rick Linden. Perhaps if you don't know him, he's a 737 pilot, Major General in the Reserve, who in his spare time teaches people how to prevent crime. No, it's not quite that way around. But anyhow, he came in and he said, look, we've got to involve different groups here. Probation, youth services, the people who sell cars, as well as the police. We've got to analyze why we're getting so much. When you analyzed, it was joyriding. So how do we intervene with these joyriders? Well, we get some of the most persistent ones through tough policing. We get some of those who've been caught, and we make sure that the curfews and the other actions are actually applied by the probation and parole people. We get youth outreach to stop them drifting into it. And we fix Dodge Caravans with immobilizers. Dodge Caravans, if you go back a few years, are one of the easiest cars to steal. And by the way, car theft isn't just car theft. People get killed. Police get injured. Within 5 years, they had reduced auto theft to national levels. That's an 83% reduction. Now, they didn't do it baking cookies. They got $50 million. Population of Manitoba is about the same as the population of Peel Region, so that gives you some idea of the sort of amounts of money that we're talking about. 50 million. Wow, what a return on investment. The insurance industry, it's not for profit, sorry. The provincial insurers have basically saved 20 to 25 million a year. So they've more than doubled the return on the investment. And that's just talking about money. If you actually look at the harm that was being done by this, it was huge. That's a Canadian example. A Canadian example. They actually got the idea originally from Regina, but they did it better than Regina. The National Crime Prevention Centre. I'm very critical of it, but it's a start. They've identified some successful programs, and if you've got a lot of patience, you might be able to get $1.5 million over 5 years. That's $7.5 million. But you won't get it for making it harder to commit the crime. You won't get it for 0 to 6, which is one of the most important areas. You won't get it directly for police youth worker programs. And most of what they're testing, in my view, is well proven. Youth inclusion projects, you can get money for that. This is where you identify an area, the sort of stuff that Dana Wilson has been showing, where you've got concentration of poverty and you've got a lot of crime stuff. You open a youth center there where you've got 2 or 3 youth workers, and these youth workers go out and they get those kids who are generally identified as most at risk and difficult. You bring them in, you interest them, you're a role model for them, you mentor them, you get them to do their homework. And British invention in the early 90s. The British found it. Within 3 years, there were 72 programs from coast to coast, and then they doubled it because it works. We're just retesting that here. A couple of projects, one in Vancouver Island, one in Cape Breton. We need to move on from that. If we're going to reduce the $83 billion of harm to crime victims in this country, then we have to get serious about putting in place those programs that work. Now, one of the most hopeful actions, I think, is the National Municipal Network, co-chaired by Montreal and Waterloo Region. This is 14 cities, basically every major city in Canada. And they have basically been cooking and begging and somehow managing to get things to happen. Now, Waterloo Region now pays for 10 people. They're about half your population. And these 10 people are basically the multipliers. They're the leadership center. That's great. Edmonton. I listened to the mayor of Edmonton make a speech very much like you did, Mr. Chairman, and he set up a task force bringing private industry, the people working on the coalface, police together to recommend what they should do, and they're putting in roughly $1 per head. Edmonton is just under $1 million, so it's about $1 million for the responsibility center and a plan. Thunder Bay. So, and there's Halifax and there's Surrey and there are others. But these folk are doing it despite, well, Edmonton is the exception. They're doing it despite what the federal and provincial governments are doing. Edmonton now, of course, is getting, quite large contracts from the provincial government for some of their actions. So these are just 4 things that I think are hopeful. I wanted to have a chart that showed a whole range of agencies. I hope Dale is going to show his chart. You probably can't see it from where you're sitting. These are 9 ministries that are working on the Alberta strategy, and each of these ministries has a task, and this is action-oriented. There's a provincial task force that recommended these things, and they're doing it. And their number 1 priority, by the way, was the leadership center, the responsibility center, and the long-term plan. So, spent a lot of time introducing things, so I'm going to go a little bit faster, and probably for most of you, you don't want that much detail, and I'll tell you where you can get the detail. So, first point, there's lots of positive conclusions from prestigious organizations. In 2002, the World Health Organization produced a world report on violence and health. And they didn't stop there. 2 years later, they had one on implementation. In 2009, they had an evidence one. In 2010, they had one on violence against women. So there's 30 years now of smart evaluations, random control trials, like we did on Cold FX. So you take 100 kids, and 50 go to a childcare program that's enriched, and 50 don't at random, and you see what happens afterwards. That's a random control trial. So there are lots of those random control trials. There are also lots of long-term studies, not done in Canada, of what are the factors that predispose people to crime. And there are even some cost-benefit analyses. We've got 30 years of these. That is a list of the major reports that have been done. Now, you don't need to do a PhD to look at each of those. So let me just tell you very briefly about them. World Health Organization, you can go on their website and you can get an interactive tool where you can look at what has been proven to work in early childhood, in youth, to deal with gender violence, to deal with knives and guns, to deal with alcohol, and to help victims. And most of these things come from countries similar to Canada. Australia. Australia isn't similar to Canada, but it's the same sort of size, but it has perpetual summer, and I'm waiting for our perpetual summer. But otherwise, it's like Canada. United States, England, Scotland, Sweden. It's very easy to look at. Click of a mouse. So you just ask your assistant, I want to know what's worked in helping mothers bring up difficult kids. You go there, you've got the program described for you, you've got the evidence. The US Department of Justice, the world's biggest incarcerator, incarcerates 1 in 4 of all prisoners in the world, has set up a site called Crime Solutions. You Google Crime Solutions, you go in, whatever it is, car theft, youth crime, bullying, whatever it is that takes your fancy, you can see there what has been shown to work. Now, if you went on that site, you would actually find one Canadian program. That Canadian program comes from Ontario. In the efforts by the group at the University of Western Ontario and the City of London trying to deal with violence against women, they woke up one morning and said, well, we don't seem to have made too much progress on this. We've got fantastic things in the courtroom, and we know how to help women more, and kids to testify, and we've got a mental health, police, social workers, we've got all these wonderful things, but it doesn't seem to be going away. Oh, well, how about prevention? So, well, where do we start? Well, violence against women has something to do with men and women. Oh, well, we can't reach men and women all that easily. Oh, yeah, schools. So how about if we developed a curriculum for schools? Oh, the schools said, well, no, we don't want that stuff. We do reading, writing, and arithmetic. And they said, oh, you don't do anything about relationships? So the 4th R is about relationships. So they developed a curriculum. They identified 22 schools in the Thames Valley school area, tossed a coin. Sorry, they didn't toss a coin to start off with. They went in and measured the boys, self-report of sexual assault, self-report of bullying. Girls, self-report of being victims of sexual assault and victims of bullying. It could actually go both ways, but I'm simplifying. They then tossed a coin, and 11 of the schools, they introduced this program. At the end of a year, they measured the results. Huge drop in admissions of sexual assault and reports of victimization. The same on bullying. You can find that on the WHO site, on the US Department of Justice site, and I don't know if you can find it in Peel Region, but you can now find it in the city of Ottawa, where our equivalent of what you're talking about here called Crime Prevention Ottawa, one of our first priorities was to train, we paid to train teachers, because the school boards wouldn't, and we now have this in both the English language school boards, and we're in the process of putting it into French for the 2 French language school boards, and that's not that